Welcome to Hope Natural Health, the podcast inspiring you to be your best version. Join me, your host, Dr. Erin, naturopathic doctor, dog mom, cancer survivor, and girl boss weekly as we discuss all things health, hormones, and happiness with a little side of this thing called life. We are back for another episode of the Hope Natural Health podcast. But last week we discussed the gut microbiome with a special guest and holistic nutritionist, Josh. So make sure you take a listen to that. There was a lot of good nuggets in there. And this week I have another special guest with me, Renae Fieck, who is a mom of 3 and an occupational therapist. She helps women optimize their time and energy through unlocking the power of their menstrual cycles, so that they can be thriving high achievers. Through her method, she helps women balance the demands of life, make a bigger impact, and get bigger results without adding more stress or needing more time. She's also the host of the Cycle Advantage podcast, and I look forward to being on her show soon. But first, let's have a great conversation with Renae. So welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited and thrilled to be here.
Yeah. So before we dive into, cycle specifics and how we can use it to work for us, tell us a little bit more about really how you got into this work, your background and your passion. And, it takes certain people to really talk about the menstrual cycle because it's kind of like the elephant in the room. So I'd be curious to hear more about how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, well, I will admit that it was definitely not something that I thought I would be talking about.
Right?
And there's still some days where I'm like, really, is this what I'm talking about all the time? But yeah, so I am an occupational therapist, and probably about 8-9 years ago, I got my dream job at the Children's Hospital. Found out that my husband had a brain tumor and that I was pregnant at the same time.
Oh my gosh.
We had like a whirlwind of a year going through having another baby and then having 3 babies under 5. My husband going through surgery, having seizures, him not being able to drive, like me working. There was just so much that happened that year that left me really kind of wondering, like, is this really how life is going to go? Like, is this really what we're going to do and for how long? And I want to enjoy my kids when they're little. And what if tomorrow never happens? Like, because with that brain tumor, you kind of are faced with that reality that you're never guaranteed tomorrow. And so I really began this itch to create more freedom in my life. And at the time, my sister was in network marketing. So I jumped in with her and loved it, but found that I was doing a whole lot of burning the candle at both ends all the time. So what I was really going after was to create more freedom and more time with my family. And it was kind of doing the opposite of that. It was taking all of my free time in the outside of the work hours. And a couple years into it, I reached out to my coach and mentor and was like, this isn't working. Like I'm putting in the work, I'm doing the things, but I'm not getting to that freedom that I want. And she was like, well, business is just a numbers game. So if you're not getting the numbers you want, you just have to do more. Like you have to put more work in to get those numbers. And I was like, I can't. Like I'm bleeding at all ends. Like my knuckles are bleeding. Like I can't. There's nothing left of me to give. And that's when I really started to dive into like productivity strategies and time hacks and like how could I become more effective? And in the process, learned about menstrual cycle and like how women's hormones are just different and how our brains think differently, the way we focus is different, how we interact with time is different, and then started integrating it in my own business. And it was a few years later that I started sharing it with clients and they were like, oh my gosh, this is so life-changing. Like this is what you need to be talking about. So it was built out of just my own journey and the own process of going through it.
I love it. So I know you can relate to a lot of my listeners. What or how can busy moms use their menstrual cycle to work for them then?
Yeah. Well, I think first off, most of us, I think just becoming aware of our cycle and knowing what's actually happening is the biggest thing that even just that, like I notice so many women, they're like, oh my gosh, yes, like that is why I feel that way. Or yes, I notice these rhythms. And so I think one, just being aware of them changes the lens in which we look at ourselves and the pressure that we put on ourselves. I think that's one of the biggest things that my clients notice is like releasing these expectations that we place on ourselves because of what society is saying or what we think we should be doing. And it
Mm-hmm.
really changes it so that we understand, like, you know what, this is where my body's at. This is what I need to do. So I think number one, like just becoming aware of it and leaning into it is the first thing that shifts. And then I think it comes into this level of being able to really embody our cycle and really like use our body as the basis for how we go about everyday life and using it as kind of the core foundation of, you know, what is happening with our bodies, because it's not just our menstrual cycle, right? Like there's so
Mm-hmm.
many parts of us that are interacting. And so the cycle is impacted by our stress levels are impacting our cycle. Our nervous system is, for most people, is so dysregulated. So it's like really coming back to the body and looking at how can we leverage the body in that way that we show up every single day.
I love that. So becoming aware, how do you recommend someone I would assume it would be with like tracking and writing things down, journaling, things like that. There's so many women that don't even know. I mean, they kind of guess, you know, when their cycle starts, but they don't really know what happens during their cycle. So I would assume you would recommend, you know, tracking or writing things down to become more aware. Would that be the first step?
Yeah. Yeah, and I would definitely start tracking like at least your period and then
Mm-hmm.
ovulation too. So ovulation is usually the one most people will skip. They don't really
Yeah.
understand what's happening. But our periods are not, or like our menstrual cycle is not just that 1 week of the month that we have our
Right.
period. The menstrual cycle is the entire month. And so
Right.
it's hard sometimes when we don't understand those really subtle cues, because our
Mm-hmm.
body, let's be honest, like our body is giving us very, very subtle cues. It's not like
Yeah.
this loudspeaker. And when it does get to the loudspeaker is usually we've let it go too long without listening
Mm-hmm.
to it. So we have to kind of learn what those subtle cues are. And so ovulation can be another big like pinpoint in the cycle to really
Mm-hmm.
pay attention. So those would be the bare minimum. I would say tracking your cycle or your period and tracking ovulation would be the bare minimum of things that I would start tracking. And you can do that in a digital tracker, you can do it in a paper tracker, a journal, whatever it
Mm-hmm.
might be. And then really what I recommend to my clients is looking at like what are the things that are going to make the most impact for you. So for my clients, most of them are entrepreneurs. They're looking at how can I become more productive in my work? Like how can
Mm-hmm.
I be more focused, get more done in a less amount of time. And so what I have them start tracking beyond those two things is like your energy level, your focus levels. So
Mm-hmm.
noticing where in the cycle do you feel that, right? Because we have general rhythms and general rules of thumb, but
Right.
everybody is different. And so
Mm-hmm.
every person, it's so valuable for us to start listening to those cues and understanding our own bodies rather than just trying to take like a Pinterest graphic of the cycle and like slapping it on our calendars and thinking that's good and done.
Yeah, absolutely. Why do you think you touched on an interesting point that I want to circle back to? As women that we're meant to, you know, recreate, why do you think we miss ovulation? Like that's the, you know, the main point of our menstrual cycle to make a
Yeah.
baby. So why do you think we often miss that point? Do you have any insight on that?
I I think it's partly because most of the whole cycle has been really taboo to talk about. So,
True.
you know, there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
stigma. It's not something that is very highly looked upon in society
Mm-hmm.
in general. And
Right.
so I think if women could get away from their period and like knowing what was happening there too, they probably would, like until,
Yeah.
you know, they learning this stuff. But for the most part, most women I talk to, they're not excited about their periods. They don't love their periods. Like they feel like that whole rhythm that happens down there is kind of a pain in the butt and they wish they could
Mm-hmm.
get rid of it, you know? So I think that partly comes from that in terms of not tracking our ovulation is because we were never told to. We were never
True.
taught to, right? When we're probably 13 years old, it was like, here's your bleeding. It's this rough time of the month. We call it
Mm-hmm.
Shark Week. It's your moody time. Here's some tampons. Here's your
Mm-hmm.
pads. Like, deal with it. And that's kind of what
Yep.
I feel like a lot of us received. And so I think for most women, it's just a lack of knowing. Like nobody's taught
Right.
them unless they're going through fertility stuff or they're
Mm-hmm.
trying to make a baby. Then they might, and like, I feel like that's when I was like, oh my gosh, there's like so much more that's going on in my body every
Right.
month, is when
Yeah.
you're wanting to know what to do with it. Yeah.
Absolutely. We don't know what we don't know. And you just were spot on as to what, most women understand their menstrual cycle is. And that's what I was told. It's like, oh, my mom told me that I was going to start bleeding from my vagina and here's a pad and it's going to happen once a month. And I remember being in high school trying to figure out on my own, like reading that giant insert for a tampon. Because I'm like, I don't want to wear a bulky pad. And I didn't even know how to insert a tampon. It was the most awkward thing. And you don't even ask your friends. It's embarrassing. Yeah. You like hide your tampon in your backpack. And it's crazy, but we can totally use our menstrual cycle to work for us. So let's dive into how can entrepreneurs, busy moms, women in general, just use their cycle to increase productivity, but more importantly, like the productivity for revenue. I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think the biggest thing is understanding how the cycle impacts us and how it changes the way we show up. So I actually just read some recent studies on the MRIs that they've been doing around women's brains and how different parts of the brain are activated, different parts of the cycle and the phases. So I think it's really helpful to know that. So those days when you feel like you're stuck in brain fog or like creative block or just like sluggish and can't move or can't get anything done, like that could be it could be normal, right? Like it could be part of the process. It could be part of the cycle versus those other times where you're like, I'm so motivated. I'm on top of this. I've got this. I'm crushing it. So I think one is tracking that and knowing that. So in general, that recharge phase, like the menstrual phase at the beginning of the month, I call it the recharge because that's what it's really geared towards. So if we think of like a Tesla, it goes incredibly fast, super quickly. But if you don't charge it, it's not going anywhere, right? So why as women do we think we can function like that? We can function on high speed all the time without ever recharging. And the beautiful thing is that our bodies actually have that recharge right before that acceleration phase, the phase when we feel ready to go and pumped up. And so making sure that you recharge during that phase is huge. And the other piece of it in that, like you talked about, like revenue and those things, is like that recharge, your menstrual phase is the best time for you to come up with like your most intuitive ideas. So I even talk to my clients about like these $1 million ideas. Like that's where they're birthed out of, is that menstrual phase, because it's the most assimilated with your subconscious, the most was what's aligned for you. So cut the noise of social media, the world, like all of those things, and let that phase be your time for creating that stuff from within you versus feeling like it's coming at you from the rest of the world. So then the recharge, and then you move after that menstrual phase, you move into the follicular phase, which I call like the accelerate phase, because that's what it feels like. It's like, here we go. Like we've just come up with these ideas. We're ready to go. We're ready to get them on the ground and moving. And then we get to the top of that estrogen peak where we're ovulating. And so our bodies are magnetic, they're radiant, they're glowing, they're like physically trying to attract a baby or make a baby, attract somebody to make a baby, attract a baby. And so that is such a great time for us to be able to do like podcasts or reels or social media content, the stuff where we are using our physical presence to radiate out to the world and connect with the other world. So those two phases, both the follicular phase and the ovulation phase, those are the phases where we are projecting so much of ourselves outward. We're putting ourselves out into the world and connecting with other people and creating big things and moving big things. It's a lot of what society has really classified and quantified as productive. And so what we see is like women trying to stay in those two phases. Like you want to stay in that place where you're pushing tons of you out, you're creating lots of big things, you're creating lots of movement, you're being really focused. But once that estrogen dips off, at the end of that is when progesterone kicks up, and progesterone feels very different. It's not the same as estrogen. And so it starts to feel a little bit more like pulling back, a little bit maybe more moody, maybe feeling a little bit more overwhelmed. Or I see a lot of my clients be like, I want to burn down my business and like take everything down because I feel like I'm failing at every part of my life. But this is such a powerful phase. It's gotten such a bad rap over time, but it is one of the biggest phases for being able to help you tap into the emotions of your audience and your people to be able to write content that's going to relate with them on such a deeper level, right? We know emotional connection is one of the biggest things that helps our audience move. And so to be able to really connect with them in that place is incredibly powerful. The other piece of it is helping us bring to the surface things that aren't serving us anymore, things that aren't working for us, or beliefs or doubts or fears or anything like that that we need to let go of and process and release or whatever, heal, so that we can then move into that next phase ready to hit the ground running. So or not to take the rest and then hit the ground running, right? Like there's a little cycle there. But it's like each one of the different phases is productive and it has different elements of our business. It's just not doing all of them at the exact same time. And I think that that's what makes a huge difference for women that are feeling burnt out or feeling out of balance or feeling overwhelmed and exhausted, is that they're trying to do all of those things at the same time. Or maybe neglecting some of those things. And each one of those pieces is really necessary for us.
Absolutely. And I want to circle back to the luteal phase, or the progesterone dominant phase. And there's so many women that, you even mentioned it, like hate that phase. And I think a lot of it goes too with hormone imbalances. That's a phase where we see a lot of hormone imbalances, specifically if maybe you're not ovulating, because if you don't ovulate, you don't make progesterone, or maybe you're perimenopausal and your progesterone levels aren't optimal, or maybe you have way too much estrogen and not enough progesterone, and that can throw your mood off and really make you symptomatic that, turns outward into your business. So you shouldn't have to suffer at all throughout your menstrual phase. So I think that's really important to point out here. And I preach that from, tops of mountains and backs of rooms, like literally every day, because menstrual health has been normalized. And even though it's normal for you, does not mean that it's normal. And so your period should come and go. Like you mentioned in the beginning, it shouldn't be a problem. It should just come and go and be more of like an annoying thing than anything. But, leaning into where your hormones are specifically dominant throughout those phases, I think is super important. It starts with awareness. Like, people don't know that. Yeah. We weren't taught that in school, in sex ed. It wasn't anything. And we were so young then, like we didn't care, right? It's like, we're in school. What are we going to do? What do we need to know about our hormones and productivity, right? So I think
it's funny. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because I had one post that I talked about. I can't remember what it said, but something along those exact lines that you said, of like getting super emotional and triggered during that phase of the month has been normalized, but it's not necessarily normal. Right. And I think that was about the gist of that post. And it spread pretty quickly, and it got a lot of hate on that post. There was a lot of really angry women about, I think, feeling unseen and unheard, because that's not their experience, that their periods and their bodies, like, it's a very painful experience. And I think and it's sad to me to see, like, that there's this many women feeling I feel like maybe I could have done the post differently so that they felt seen and heard. But at the same time, I'm hoping it kind of challenged their sort of reality, that this was where things are. Because I think it is sad that there's so many women. And I actually found it interesting that it was Facebook. All the women on Facebook were really angry and being like, screw you, essentially. And then the women on Instagram were like, tell me how to fix this. Like, tell me what to do differently. Like, so maybe there's some generational pieces there too, because I find like Facebook is a different generation than Instagram. But how, like you said, like, we've been just so conditioned to think like this is such a painful, horrible experience that women just have to put up with, and then the men around us or the people around us just have to deal with our moods. But I have found the same thing, like, for me, as I become more aware and more in tune and better taking care of my body throughout the cycle, I talked to somebody the other day. I'm like, I don't even really think that I notice many shifts anymore. Like, it's just such a smooth sailing month. Like, yes, I may notice like a little bit more moody one phase, but it's not so extreme that it's like these raging extremes, And I think that that's a big difference for women.
Yeah. That last half is my favorite part of the cycle. Like I love progesterone. I call her the queen of hormones. I am super productive. You know, it's my favorite part of the cycle, but so many women hate it because that's where most of the symptoms happen is PMS. And they're like, well, I feel horrible three weeks out of the month. It's like, that's not normal. So you don't, it should be a really, really powerful phase. So if it's not, we've got to dive into deeper as to why, because you shouldn't have to suffer them. So I want to touch a little bit on rest and why this is important because women, specifically entrepreneurs who you speak to and, you know, moms out there, go, 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 go. So how or why, or how can moms get more rest? Because they're oftentimes, you know, the last to take care, like they take care of themselves last. And why is this important for our cycle?
Yeah. Well, for me personally, I have found that knowing that there's like 1 week of the month that I can give myself permission to just rest more helps so much. Like it's this knowing that I will get to it and it's not going to be forever. Like for instance, like the laundry, right? Like when during my menstrual phase, I'm like, I don't really care if there's a laundry stacking up on the sink. I don't care if we use if there's dirty dishes in the sink. I kind of let some of those things go, knowing that there's going to be in a week from now or a couple days from now, it's all going to be fine and it's all going to be back to normal. Like in this moment, I can let some of those things slide. Like I can let some of those expectations slide. So I think for me, that's a big one. I also just knowing that I'm more keen and more aware of being able to ask for support and ask for help or turning things down during that phase. So looking at like even just shuttles, driving the kids back and forth to school or to soccer practice or something. Like it's easy to just be like, hey, would you mind just picking them up today for me? You know, versus it's those small little places that we can find some of that rest. It doesn't have to be, I'm on the couch all day long doing nothing. In fact, when I look at that phase, I don't even see it so much as rest. Like it's more of how do we recharge? Because most women are feeling, I actually did a poll recently in one of my Facebook groups and I asked like women who are saying that they feel tired and exhausted or whatever, do you think that it's a mental energy or do you think it's a physical energy? And most of them said it's a mental energy. It's not a physical energy. So a woman who's feeling overwhelmed and exhausted and tired and tries to get rest, she sits down on the couch and watches TV or scrolls on Instagram. Neither of those two things are going to actually make her feel good. Like neither of them are going to help her recharge. And so when we focus on that phase, not just resting, but looking at like, how do I recharge? Like, what are those things that really nourish my mind, nourish my body, nourish my soul, like nourish me, and focusing in on that. And that may look like having time by yourself, but it may not. It may look like going for a hike with your family or going for a walk at the end of the day. It might look like just sitting outside for a little bit or taking a couple deep breaths in the car or any of those pieces. And I think those are the micro moments that get underappreciated. They're the ones that and I will say I am so incredibly busy. Like I have so much on my plate. I still work at the hospital. I have 3 kids. I take literally the season is like the crazy season of baseball every night of the week and like being in different places and like shuffling and juggling, carpool driving at the end of the day. Like it is literally crazy. And yet I think the way that I honor that is by knowing what phase I'm in and when I need to let things go and close the computer and shut things down versus when can I push hard. And I think that awareness is so key to helping a woman feel rested and feeling recharged and feeling balanced. It's not so much of, I'm not a person that likes to sit still. Like I don't like to sit and do just what quote unquote rest. But I also know like my body needs more sleep at certain times of the month. So I'm okay like going to bed earlier or skipping a workout in the morning, knowing that in this phase, my body needs more of that than it does the actual workout. And so it's just really, I think, honoring those and knowing that you're just different throughout the month. I don't know if that really answered that.
No, totally. And it spurred another question. How you said you're so busy, you've got so much going on. So I know a lot of moms, they sit with their planner and they plan out their meals and, the kids' activities and who's going where and what time, et cetera. Is that one of your practices too, is sitting down with your calendar and putting where you are in your menstrual cycle and then planning ahead for that? Like, do you do it every week, or is it something that you do once a month? Like, once you start your period, you'll know when your next period's coming, so you can plan it that way. Can you share with us how you kind of plan out your cycle?
Yeah. Well, I'm a queen of efficiency, like whatever's the simplest and easiest. So Google Calendar is my best friend. My cycle does have its own calendar inside of my Google Calendar.
I love it.
So like I can toggle it on or toggle it off depending on sometimes when I'm like, I don't want to see it every day, but when I'm planning something, I need to see it. So I can toggle it on and off, and I can slide it, move it if things are shift and change. Like my cycle tends to vary about 5 days. So like I can shift and adjust as needed, and then just changes all the ones after that. So I do that. And then I will at the beginning of the month. So during that menstrual phase, I will look at the whole month ahead and kind of say, okay, if my cycle changed a little bit, do things fall still in an okay spot? Do I want to move anything? That works generally better for like my clients, my coaching calls, my podcast interviews, all those types of things. But like daily life, you have to do it. Like it doesn't, like I can't get out of life. Like with my kids, I still have to take them to school every day. So for me, those are the places where it doesn't necessarily, those things may not shift and change, but I do look at the calendar every single Sunday. So for me, I'm a very visual person. Having it in my Google Calendar, I inherently miss something, or I double book myself somehow or something. Like there's something about the digital calendar that is just not quite the same. So every Sunday I take my Google Calendar and I whiteboard marker it on a frame in our kitchen so that I have that visual for the week ahead. And that is my like stopping checkpoint to, okay, is there too much on here? Do I need to have my husband pick up the kids one day? Can I shift something? Are we gonna have to cancel something? Do I need to move something? That's really my big checkpoint of the day of like looking like, okay, today I've after school, I've got an orthodontist appointment for one of the kids. And then we've got 2 baseball games and one has swim practice. And I'm like, how and where am I going to get all these people to where they need to go? Right. So I use that Sunday. It doesn't take long. It's literally probably 5 minutes of just transposing it from Google to the whiteboard, but it's just enough to make me feel like I'm 5 steps ahead of what's coming at me rather than feeling like something's coming at me. And I think that's the biggest thing that so many women that are feeling so busy all the time, that's why. It's not necessarily the amount of things that's on the schedule. It's the amount of things that they feel like are coming at them while they're unprepared for it. And so when you feel prepared and you feel like, I used to use the word proactive rather than reactive, when you're in that proactive space, it sometimes doesn't matter how much is on there. You know that you can accomplish it because you're prepared for it. Versus the reactive thing, it's like one little thing goes awry and like all hell breaks loose.
Yeah. And I think that's really important that you touched on that there's some things you can't control. Like you can't, if you're day 1 of your menstrual cycle and you've got, baseball games and kids' school or a presentation at their school, it's like, well, you got to kind of go with it, and that's okay. But at least you can prepare for it, and maybe the day before take extra time to recharge or take some more stuff off your plate, et cetera. So I think it goes back to what you just said in the very beginning is awareness. And with anything in life, I think it is aware. It's the same thing with food. It's like, just be aware of how much carbs you're consuming or how much caffeine you're actually drinking or how many times you check your email. You don't know what you don't know, and tracking and being aware of these things is so important. So I appreciate you sharing that. I'm curious where you are. Like you said, is it today, the orthodontist and the baseball games, and you did the podcast? Yes. Like where are you in your cycle right now?
I'm actually on like day 3.
Okay.
So,
that's okay.
But and to go on this, to say like, this is not my ideal time to record a podcast, right?
Right.
You are my only appointment today.
Okay.
So
yeah.
knowing that too, like I only have one appointment on my schedule today. The rest of the day is for me to work internally on my own back end stuff.
Yeah.
And I think it's really powerful when, especially I've had a lot of women start asking like, well, how do I do this in corporate? Right.
Yeah.
Because my corporate job is not going to let me take a week off every month. They're not going to let me just totally veg out.
Right.
Is looking at like women are incredibly powerful. We've been doing it the man's way in this 24-hour rhythm for a very long time. Like we all can do it. Like I can show up here for a podcast on day 3. You can do really hard things on that phase 2. Like we can do it. It just may not feel as best, right? Like I
absolutely
might have felt more radiant and more beautiful and better articulated my words or whatnot if I had done this in 2-3 weeks from now.
Yeah.
But it's okay. Like it's okay. And so I think looking at using your cycle not as something that we go to people and be like, well, I can't do this anymore. Like it's my phase. I need this week off, or like I'm not doing the dishes, but using it more as like a leverage, like it's a power. This is like an asset that you have, not a weakness. And I think if we really want to change the landscape of how we're working, especially in corporate, like I work with entrepreneurs because I feel like they have the power to make this movement change. But in corporate, if we really want to do that, then we have to approach it from that way. We have to approach it from this place of this is an asset. It's not a weakness that women are just asking for time off or they're wanting to be accommodated to by their cycle. It's like, no, I can still show up and do things really great, regardless of what phase of my cycle I'm in. But if I want to do it the most powerful way and the most like amazing way, this is the rhythm that I would want to do it in.
Oh, that's such good advice. Super awesome. Well, we could probably jam on this for hours because I love talking about Ant Flow and all the things about it, but we'll wrap it up for the sake of time. And I'll ask you one last question that I ask all my podcast guests. What would be your best or favorite health tip that you can share with the audience?
Ooh, my favorite or best health tip. Honestly, I will say I'm an advocate for sleep. Like, I think it's one of those vastly underrated things that has made such a huge difference for me. And when I've started letting my body dictate like how much sleep it needs versus how much I wanted it to do, or I mean, I would love to be a part of the 5 a.m. club. Like, it just sounds so amazing to get up early and to start my day. My sister does this whole like tea and meditation and thing in the morning. And like, I envy that. Like, I wish that I could do that. But my body needs like 8 to 9 hours of sleep. So if I'm up at 5 o'clock in the morning,
you got to go to bed with your kids.
Yeah, before my kids. Like, I don't know if I can do that. So I think looking at like honoring and just knowing that we are all different. And so learning to listen to what your body needs in that, like I've learned my body needs that 8 to 9 hours. And so I've kind of given myself permission to just let that sleep happen and let go of the expectation of the 5 a.m. wake up. But I think that would be the big thing. Like, I think sleep has made such a huge difference for me.
Yeah, it's very underrated, but so powerful. Yeah. Awesome, Renae. Well, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Do you want to speak? Do you still have your free training available?
I do. So there is a free training that is geared towards like helping women really, how do we take that week off, right? So predominantly more for entrepreneurs, but there's definitely pieces of what we can do, what we can let go of, and those expectations if you're not an entrepreneur for being able to do that. So I would be happy to share that with your audience. Yeah,
we have the link here, so we'll make sure we include that in the show notes, and all of Renae's contact information will be there as well. So again, Renae, thank you so much for being here, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. And that's a wrap. We'll see you all next week.